Hi, thank you for asking me to join you. It's my pleasure to be here. Okay, so I am Emmie and I am the CEO of a charity called Cornwall Museums Partnership, and some of you will know quite a bit about CMP and it might be new to others of you. So bear with me while I just do a bit of background because it is quite unusual, a bit of a hybrid organisation. So I'm going to share some of the ways that museums in Cornwall have been working collaboratively to navigate what I'm going to describe as the kind of economic, environmental and emotional disturbance which we've all been living with, I think. I'm going to share some examples which describe how collaboration is helping museums to recover from the shock of the pandemic and address the climate emergency. So there is lots of collaboration going on, but I'm just going to focus on those kind of two themes principally. And it's my belief, those of you that know me know this already, that a truly embedded approach to collaboration is actually a prerequisite for resilience and impact. So some background about CMP. It is an independent charity, so not responsible for any museums, works entirely collaboratively, doesn't run museums, formed in 2015. Emerged from a moment of crisis, actually, 10 years ago in museums in Cornwall, the result of long-term underfunding of the sector here, some really acute financial issues. Some of you might remember that Royal Cornwall Museum at the time had sold 2 of its paintings to raise funds. And a kind of sector that was typified by firefighting, isolated working, many voices, a lot of noise, but less impact. And the stakeholders were actually confused about what museums were for and the impact that they could achieve. And it was in that context that a small number of museums started to work together to see if they could tackle challenges collectively. And I was in preparing for this talk, I thought, well, that is interesting, actually, that there was that moment of crisis that kind of spurred on this collaboration. And I wonder if we might see new collaborations emerging in the kind of context of where we are now. So we don't exist to tell museums what to do. Those of you who know the independent Republic of Cornwall will know that that is a very bad approach to take. And there's a kind of instinctive dislike of authority and hierarchy here. It's kind of baked into the culture. So we're not hierarchical. Our ethos has always been about partnership. And we think that collaborative practice helps to grow a culture of trust, both within a museum and with communities. Our purpose is to create positive social change with museums, and we are very explicit about that. We are interested in maximising the public benefit of museums, and that informs everything that we do. We help museums to be more open and connected to the people that they exist to serve. We work with all museums, and there are over 70 of them in Cornwall. So we don't have any members as such, so our name is a bit misleading in that regard. And there are kind of 4 categories of things that we do. Training and workforce development, R&D, so kind of innovation, demonstrator projects where we're trying to sort of be a bit of an innovation lab for the museum sector at large, test things out which could be scaled elsewhere. We broker partnerships between museums and the private sector and the public sector, the voluntary sector, and we coordinate a range of programs. And we do lots of advocacy. And in order to do that, we do quite a lot of data collection as well. So we're very interested in impact. In terms of positive social change, I've kind of put the descriptors up here because that can be kind of a woolly concept. I thought it's worth just sharing what we mean by that. All of our work delivers to these outcomes, and we have spent some time kind of defining what social change looks like. We know that the best museums are delivering results in all of these categories, but we're talking about activities which support people's well-being, foster a sense of place, local pride, tackle loneliness. I'm going to give you some examples of that work in a little while. We're talking about sustainable economic growth. So for us in Cornwall, that's particularly about trying to tackle the low wage economy. So we have a much lower average wages than is true of the national average. And many of you will be familiar with the housing crisis, which is a particular pressure on all communities here at the moment. And we're really interested in regenerative tourism too. I'm not going to talk so much about that today, but we've started to test out some work in that area. We're interested in skills and activities which boost museums' confidence. We're really interested in work which gives everyone a voice and influence in society. I'm going to talk a little bit about some of that stuff today. And we are interested in work that contributes to a tolerant and equitable society where people are treated fairly and with respect. So it's in that context that I'm going to share with you some examples of museums' work. Our values are, unsurprisingly, collaboration, integrity, inclusion, and innovation. And in terms of what collaboration looks like in practice, we define that as behaviours such as the following. So seeking out new opportunities, setting boundaries so that we don't overcommit, so that we can deliver on our promises, being outward looking and open, creating shared values and goals, seeking out, listening to and acting on feedback. So it's about listening, seeing people as experts in their own circumstances as opposed to marginalised or at risk, and communicating with positive intent. So all of that is kind of a bit of background about the feel of the work that we do, the kind of principles that it's rooted in. So I hope that makes some kind of sense. I've sort of whipped through it there. Okay, some examples of the work in museums at the moment, what I'm going to share now. One of the things that we've been particularly keen on is from the very beginning of CMP is to facilitate and nurture a range of networks which support museum staff and volunteers to share skills, seize opportunities and solve problems together. And lots of you who know Cornwall will know that most of the museums in Cornwall are volunteer-led. So we're talking, vast proportion of that 70 being led by volunteers. One of the things that I'm most proud of is our Pathways programme, which is set up to try and diversify the museum sector. So it includes an inclusive volunteer training programme called Citizen Curators, led by somebody called Tamina Goskar, who's done excellent work nationally and here in Cornwall. A trainee curator programme funded by John Ellerman, which has provided 15 paid trainee posts for entry-level roles in museums in Cornwall, and 25 apprenticeships across Cornwall, across museums in Cornwall. And those kind of things that are creating the talent pipeline, which is really having a transformational effect on museums. It's helping to bring diversity and new perspectives to museums, and it's actually been like a shot in the arm for museums in Cornwall. So the first network I want to talk about is the Future Museums Network, which involves people from that Pathways programme. And really interesting in that when we started talking about this work at the beginning, it was very much couched in terms of what the young people or the participants in these programs would get from it, and much less about what museums would learn. And I think I'm much more clear-sighted now on the benefits of involving, a wider range of people, particularly young people, in decision-making in museums. And the Future Museums Network involves young people who are really values-led. They're bringing new energy and focus to museums in Cornwall. And they're working together to develop a response to share with museums on sustainability. So they started by surveying the community and they responded to the answers that they got. And it kind of mirrors the leadership of young people in society on climate issues generally, I think. And, this kind of idea that museums aren't remote from the wider trends like that. And that when we bring young people, or work with young people in museums, their voices have an authority and we can provide a platform. And I think what my team were sharing with me is that, the very strong belief that the climate issue is an issue of social justice, and that how we should respond, should respond to it, should recognise that. And it's actually about sharing power. And that's what this Future Museums Network is doing. And some small, because that's kind of bigger theory, but on a smaller level, all about these lovely blue gloves, they have created some real practical interventions. And so it's quite, any of that you've tried to recycle gloves will know that it's actually quite expensive and difficult. Well, it certainly is in Cornwall, expensive and difficult to do on your own. So the Future Museums Network have actually created a means to do this, created a central point for all museums in Cornwall to now recycle their gloves. Another network that we started more recently is the Inclusive Collections Network, and this isn't something that we're really talking about much publicly. It's a space that's emerged from something that you might know more about, which is the Citizen Curators Programme that I referred to before. So that really has had involved lots of conversations around ethics, around what museums do, how they collect, and naturally led to conversations and discussion around decolonisation. And those of you who've looked at the MA's toolkit will have seen that one of the citizen curators, their work at the Museum of Cornish Life in Helston is included in the new toolkit, decolonisation toolkit. And speaking to museums, I think we became really clear that actually there was a lot of interest, a lot of desire to enact meaningful decolonisation work, but a real lack of confidence about where to start. And so that's why we've started the Inclusive Collections Network. And it's actually all about coaching, listening, asking questions. And I was thinking about that, and I was thinking actually those are the traits that Tamina has brought to citizen curators, as in terms of the whole programme, and that actually those are the traits, if embedded in a museum, that lead to really great work, really engaged museums working very closely with their communities. I started to think about what would the coaching museum look like, but anyway, that's another little side thought. So citizen curators, there are 7 organisations sharing learning together, creating this talent pipeline. And that's another of the networks that we have been facilitating for quite some time. The strategic context for that work is actually the UN Global Goals. Because we're interested in tackling intolerance and promoting understanding, as I said previously, in thinking about what positive social change looks like. And so there's a global framework for this museum collaboration that enables this hyperlocal work to actually have an international context. And it's all about working collectively with people across the planet who are committed to creating a better world. And I draw your attention to Goal 16, which is about promoting peaceful and inclusive societies for sustainable development. We've spent some time over the last 18 months redeveloping our business plan, and it's now centred around these. We picked out several of the UN global goals for sustainable development that I'm showing you on the screen now. And our business plan is centred around those. So I think there's something interesting about how the motivating effect that working in this bigger context can have when you're working in what feels like quite a remote way sometimes, or certainly with a lack of resources. A bit more about what that looks like on the ground. So in terms of this hyperlocal collaboration, museums have started to work with local climate action groups. Many of you may be working with them already. So these are images from PK Porthcurno, which is right down at the bottom of Cornwall near Land's End, doing some really excellent work with a range of local and national environmental partners that's really gaining momentum. And this is a picture in the middle of the climate cafe that they've been working, they've been hosting in partnership with the local climate action group, a free event which provides opportunities for local people to connect and think about what they want to do in their local place. And part of that has led to a whole village approach to creating a plastic-free community, which you can see is clipped there in the newspaper article. We've also, in terms of COVID recovery, been working on projects that tackle isolation and loneliness. And this was a priority for us before the pandemic. But actually, we've really been able to accelerate the work that we've been doing with the Memory Cafe network. Many of you will be familiar with and involved in that already. But this idea that museums can lend confidence as trusted institutions, I think has been quite important in that context, and some really excellent work that's been happening at a museum called Wheel Martin, an industrial museum. They've been working really well with their memory cafe, and that work was actually set up by their cleaner. So I wanted to say something about leadership coming from all aspects of museum team and a culture of trust that's actually enabled that museum to draw on the skills, passions and networks of everybody within the team. The pictures on the screen are from a recent project that we did with the National Gallery as part of the Van Huysum tour. These sessions focused on working with another memory cafe, had 25 participants that most of whom hadn't left their homes for very many months. And again, we're sort of reminding us of the power of collections to overcome that COVID isolation, some really important work. And we partnered with the Sensory Trust on that project too. This collaboration that I'm showing now, Cornish Tales, is really kind of, again, thinking about how we can use audio archives much more effectively. And what we tried to do was see if we could support the well-being of care home residents by using audio archives to enable some of those really isolated people to feel more connected to their place and their community. And we've been working with a tech company called Hi9 to make those audio archives accessible in a much more interpreted way. So it's part of an experience. In effect, you go into a pub and you access it by an Alexa smart speaker. This all sounds completely bizarre, but I'd encourage you to have a little play with it, and it's really quite fun. And there's something really quite touching about listening to voices from the past. We used Alexa speakers because the Plymouth University had been investing in a project in Cornwall where they had put 150 smart speakers in care homes across Cornwall. So we knew the infrastructure was there for people to access these sound collections. I think there's a few little voices now.
I remember coming down from most. Here was the Sydney Valley, just a few miles from Land's End.
So what you can do is go into the pub, the audio environment, and you can encounter those people and listen to their stories. But there is also a series of songs as well that you can sing along from. And the next collaboration we did was with the local theatre and a PR company. We managed to get some money as part of the G7 summit here in Cornwall to create something called the Memory Lane Tavern event. And that was creating a Cornish evening that would be targeting global Cornish communities to see if we could engage them with museums and extend our reach, really. We had great fun doing that, and we reached 28,000 people as part of that event. Didn't cost a huge amount of money. It was a really creative, fun thing to be involved in. Very quickly, in the last minute before I finish, we've been working with a tech company thanks to the Art Fund, to create really high-res 3D scans of textile collections that are not normally displayed. We're interested in seeing if the gaming industry is interested in buying those, so we're exploring whether there will be a new income stream for museums. We're also working with a tech company who's based in Cornwall to create something called Museum Lens, which is a new tool that uses AI to gather data about audiences' feelings about museums and their museum experience. So a new insight tool that doesn't need a survey. And And just to finish then, my top tips for collaboration. So these are the things I was thinking about when I put this presentation together, try and draw out some reflections. Putting young people in charge has been fantastic for us. It's made a really big difference. Networking relentlessly, I think, has been hugely important. Being part of something bigger has also helped to inspire people, as has being ambitious and creative. Sometimes it's easier to mobilize people around a bigger idea. Sharing our impact has been vital. I've put get out more. One of the things that Tamina had taught me is, actually, if you want to do that work, it's about being part of the community. It's about acting like a human. It's about being interested, connecting with people, going to stuff, and making those human connections. And really focusing on your values. I think that's what will, and communicating those clearly will bring like-minded partners to you. And yeah, I'll leave it there. Thank you for listening.